I never planned to go to war with the HOA. Hell, I didn't even know what an HOA was until the day I bought my dream property, a few acres of quiet land on the edge of Maplewood County, wrapped around a narrow creek that glimmered like glass in the morning sun. It wasn't much to anyone else, just an old cabin, a few pine trees, and the smell of freedom. But to me, it was everything I'd worked for, a place where I could wake up to birds, not traffic. I'd spent 20 years building roads for other people, pouring asphalt under burning sun and freezing rain, dreaming of the day I'd build something for myself. When I first drove down that dirt road, my truck rattling and the dust trailing behind like a smoke signal, I knew I'd found it. The land spoke to me. The creek ran right through the back of the property, splitting the woods in half. On one side stood my cabin, small and sturdy. On the other side, just open earth, old oak roots, and the whisper of wind through tall grass. I spent my weekends fixing the porch, painting the walls, and chopping wood. It was peace, something I'd never had before. Then came the neighbors. They weren't bad people at first, just new, clean-cut faces moving into a freshly built subdivision a few hundred yards down the road. The development was called Willow Estates, the kind of place where every mailbox matched and every lawn looked like a golf course. They were the kind of people who liked rules, neat driveways, uniform shutters, no unauthorized flags. I didn't think much of it until one of them stopped by my gate one morning, a woman with sharp sunglasses and a clipboard in hand. She smiled, but it wasn't the kind of smile that reaches the eyes. "Hi there," she said, looking around like she owned the place. "You must be Mr. Cooper." "I'm Linda, president of the Willow Estates Homeowners Association." I wiped my hands on my jeans and nodded. "That right?" I didn't know I was part of any association. She laughed softly, the way people do when they think you're joking. "Oh, technically you're not in Willow Estates, but your creek runs through the boundary line. We're updating property maps to reflect community guidelines." I frowned. "Guidelines?" "Just minor things," she said, waving her clipboard like a magic wand. "Maintenance standards, environmental regulations, access rights for the shared waterway." That's when I realized what she was saying. The HOA was trying to claim part of my land. The creek, which had always been mine, ran along the edge of their new development. Apparently, some surveyor with a fancy drone decided that the line dividing our properties was unclear. Suddenly, my back acres, the ones I hunted on, the ones I'd fenced off and maintained for years, were being listed as part of the HOA's protected area. At first, I tried to be civil. I met with Linda and her board in their freshly painted clubhouse, sitting under fluorescent lights while they talked about community vision and aesthetic consistency. They said my cabin didn't fit their standards. They said my old truck, parked out front, was an eyesore. One guy even suggested I replace my wood fence with approved composite panels. I told them politely to get off my property. But polite doesn't work with people like that. A week later, I came home to find a bright orange notice stapled to my fence, unauthorized construction, subject to fine. They'd actually fined me for repairing my own gate. I called the county. The county sent me in circles. The HOA said the creek, and the land 10 feet on each side, was now considered community-managed property. According to their map, the line went straight through my yard. That's when the real fight began. I dug through every record I had, deeds, maps, tax receipts, the works. My late father had bought this land in 1987, long before Willow Estates even existed. I found his name in county archives, his signature faded but clear. Legally, the creek and everything within 30 feet of it were mine. I had proof. When I presented that proof to the HOA board, Linda's smile vanished. She folded her hands, her tone turning cold. "Mr. Cooper, this matter will be reviewed by our legal department." Their legal department turned out to be one guy in a suit who'd probably never stepped on muddy ground in his life. He sent me letters, pages of threats and technical jargon, claiming easements, drainage rights, and shared maintenance responsibilities. It was all nonsense meant to wear me down. But they didn't know me. You can't work construction for 2 decades and not learn how to fight slow battles. I'd spent my life dealing with bureaucrats, inspectors, and egos bigger than skyscrapers. I wasn't about to let a suburban HOA steal my land because they thought it would look better on paper. Weeks turned into months. I started noticing subtle things: my mailbox getting smashed, nails in my driveway, a drone buzzing over my roof at night. I knew it was them. They wanted me to sell, to get tired and move. But I didn't scare easy. One morning, I caught a man in a reflective vest standing by my creek, measuring something with a laser tool. "Hey!" I shouted, storming down the hill. "You're trespassing." He barely looked up. "HOA survey team," he muttered, just confirming the boundary. I yanked the stake out of the ground and threw it in the water. "You just confirmed it. Get off my land." That night, they called the sheriff. Said I'd threatened an HOA official. Luckily, the deputy who showed up was an old buddy of mine from high school. He looked around, shook his head, and said quietly, "They're pushing hard, Coop. You might want to lawyer up." That's when I decided, if they wanted a fight, they'd get one. But not in court. See, I knew something about that creek they didn't. It wasn't just a shallow stream. Underneath, it was connected to a series of natural runoff channels that led all the way to the old quarry half a mile west. When it rained, the water surged fast, carving deep trenches. I'd seen it flood before. I knew exactly how the land behaved. So I started digging. At first, it was just a trench, widening the creek where it met my boundary, reinforcing the edges with sandbags and timber. I told anyone who asked that I was working on erosion control. But day by day, week by week, that trench grew deeper, wider, and stronger. I hauled gravel, concrete, and stones by hand. When neighbors peeked over the fence, I smiled and waved. Linda came by once, clutching her clipboard like a shield. "What exactly are you building, Mr. Cooper?" she asked, her tone dripping suspicion. "Just protecting my property from runoff," I said, pointing at the creek. "You know, environmental maintenance." She didn't like that answer. I could see it in her eyes. But she couldn't prove anything. By midsummer, my trench wasn't just a trench anymore. It was a moat. A wide, muddy ring curling around the outer edge of Willow Estates, cutting off the manicured lawns from the county road. I diverted the natural water flow so that whenever it rained, the runoff filled my new creation. The HOA had built their precious subdivision right on low ground. My property sat higher. The water had nowhere else to go but around them. I watched from my porch as puddles began to gather by their driveways. They'd stolen my land. Now I surrounded theirs. And I wasn't done yet. The first time it rained after I finished the main trench, I sat on my porch with a cup of black coffee and watched nature do her work. The sky turned gray, thunder rolled through the hills, and the first fat drop splashed against the railing. Then came the downpour, a steady, roaring wall of water that hit the creek like an angry drumbeat. The current surged, twisting and snarling, feeding straight into the new channel I'd carved. By sunset, the low-lying lawns of Willow Estates shimmered like mirrors. Water pooled around the cul-de-sacs, rippling against decorative mailboxes and manicured flower beds. The HOA's perfect world had turned into a swamp. And there I was, high and dry, sitting back in my rocking chair, feeling the kind of satisfaction only justice can give. I wasn't trying to destroy anything. Not yet. But I wanted them to feel what it was like when someone else took control of their land. I wanted them to taste helplessness. The next morning, I heard the whining of generators and the shouts of men in polos and khakis. When I walked down to the fence line, a small army of landscapers and maintenance crews were out there, pumping water and digging ditches of their own. Linda stood in the middle of it all, her neat hair soaked, barking orders like a field general. She spotted me instantly. "Mr. Cooper," she yelled over the noise. "Do you know what's happening here?" I took a long sip of coffee and said, "Looks like a drainage issue. You might want to call the county." Her face flushed red. "Don't play games with me. You've diverted water illegally." I shrugged. "That creek's on my property. I'm allowed to manage runoff however I see fit. You should probably read your own bylaws before lecturing me." The men behind her stared, unsure whether to keep working. I turned and walked back up the hill, leaving her standing in the mud. That afternoon, I got a certified letter from the HOA's attorney claiming willful property damage and environmental interference. I laughed when I read it. They wanted to fine me again, $10,000 this time. They even threatened to get a restraining order if I continued unauthorized modifications. I didn't even bother replying. Instead, I kept building. The moat became more than just a trench, it turned into a full-blown engineering project. I reinforced the banks with limestone blocks scavenged from the old quarry, built sluice gates using scrap metal and pulleys, and added a small wooden bridge for myself so I could cross easily. I wasn't just building a barrier anymore. I was creating a border. The work gave me purpose. I spent hours every evening moving dirt, setting forms, and measuring flow angles. The air smelled like wet earth and pine. My hands were raw, but it felt right, like I was taking back what was stolen. At night, I'd sit by the creek and listen to the frogs croak and the water bubble. That sound became my anthem, my reminder that I wasn't powerless. Every ripple was a small victory. But Linda and her crew didn't back off. Within 2 weeks, they filed a complaint with the County Environmental Board. I got summoned for an inspection. When the county truck pulled up, I thought I was finished. A tall man in a green jacket stepped out, clipboard in hand, wearing that official look people get when they're about to tell you bad news. "You Cooper?" he asked. "Yep. Mind showing me the project?" I led him down to the creek. He took notes, snapped pictures, checked slope angles. I told him everything, how the HOA had altered the drainage line, how I was preventing erosion, how I had documentation proving the land was mine. He didn't say much. A week later, I got the report in the mail, no violation detected. Property owner acting within rights. When Linda found out, she was furious. She came storming up my driveway, heels sinking into the wet dirt. "You bribed them," she shouted. "There's no way they cleared that monstrosity legally." I stood on the porch, arms crossed. "Maybe they just understand property law better than you do." Her jaw clenched. "You can't isolate us like this. You're cutting off access to the county road." "That's funny," I said. "Didn't you cut off my access to the creek when you changed those maps?" She didn't answer. She just turned and walked away, her shoes squelching in the mud. After that day, I became a ghost story in Willow Estates. Kids whispered that the man in the cabin dug tunnels under the neighborhood. Parents warned each other not to trespass near the creek. Drones stopped flying over my roof. The HOA meetings grew tense, their budgets bleeding from constant maintenance repairs. Then came the breaking point. It was early August, right after a week of relentless summer storms. The ground in Willow Estates was soaked. Their new retention ponds overflowed, and the main road leading in and out of the subdivision sat barely above the flood line. I was repairing one of my sluice gates when I saw the first cracks appear along the HOA's side of the embankment. Their own construction crew had cut corners, cheap materials, rushed drainage. When the next storm rolled in, the pressure built fast. The soil gave way, and a torrent of muddy water ripped through their pristine lawns, washing mulch, fences, and patio furniture into my moat. It was chaos. Cars got stranded. Yards turned into shallow lakes. The HOA's private security tried to redirect traffic, but there was nowhere to go. The entire neighborhood was surrounded by water. I didn't do anything that night. I just watched. Watched the lights flicker in those perfect houses, watched people wade through knee-deep puddles, watched the ones who had laughed at me scramble for sandbags. By dawn, the rain had stopped. The place looked like a disaster zone. That morning, I found a convoy of trucks outside my gate, county vehicles, emergency crews, and, of course, Linda. Her hair was a mess, her clipboard gone. She looked more human than I'd ever seen her. "Mr. Cooper," she said, her voice trembling with exhaustion, "we need your help." Those words hit me harder than I expected. Turns out, the only dry road that connected the subdivision to the highway ran across my land. Their route was flooded, and they couldn't get supplies, ambulances, or repair crews in. The moat had become a barrier they couldn't cross. "You want my help?" I asked quietly. She nodded. "Please. We'll work something out." I studied her face. There was no smugness left, no power, no rules, just desperation. For a moment, I thought about saying no. I thought about letting them drown in their own arrogance. But that's not who I am. I'm stubborn, not cruel. So I grabbed my keys, walked to the old bridge I'd built, and opened the sluice gates one by one. The water began to drain, slow and steady, lowering the levels enough for the county crew to move in. I even helped them set up pumps and direct runoff toward the old quarry basin. By evening, the worst was over. The HOA was shaken but safe. When it was done, Linda walked up to me again, her voice softer this time. "I didn't realize," she began. "You've lived here a long time, haven't you?" I nodded. "Long enough to know this land better than your surveyors ever will." She sighed. "Maybe we can start over." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But something in her eyes told me she wasn't done. She was just regrouping. That night, as the county trucks rolled out, I stood by the creek watching the stars reflect in the water. The land was quiet again, peaceful. But peace never lasts long when money and pride are involved. And I knew, deep down, that the HOA wasn't finished with me. They'd lost the first battle. But war was coming. I thought the storm had washed away more than their fences, it had washed away their pride. For a few quiet weeks, it felt like things were settling down. The air smelled cleaner, the sound of hammers and lawnmowers faded, and I almost started to believe Linda meant what she said about starting over. The county crews packed up, the pumps stopped running, and the water slowly returned to its normal course. I spent my mornings fishing off the bridge, drinking coffee while the fog rolled across the surface of my moat. It was peaceful again, almost too peaceful. Then one evening, I noticed something strange. A white SUV parked at the edge of Willow Estates, its headlights off. I didn't think much of it at first, but it came back the next night. And the night after that. Always the same spot, engine idling, someone sitting inside watching. I'm no stranger to being watched. When you've had people trying to take your land, you learn to notice shadows. So I decided to find out who was behind the wheel. Just after midnight, I slipped through the trees, boots crunching lightly on dry leaves. The SUV's windows were tinted, but when I got close enough, I saw the glint of a camera lens sticking out from a cracked window. Someone was filming my property. I stepped into the beam of the headlights. "You lost?" I asked. The driver startled, fumbling for something on the seat. Then the door opened and out stepped a man in a suit, not one of the local homeowners. He flashed a badge, private investigator, hired by the Willow Estates HOA. "Mr. Cooper," he said smoothly, "I'm documenting evidence of unlawful water diversion. The HOA intends to file a civil complaint." I laughed. "Tell your boss she should have picked a better spy." I turned my back and walked home. But I knew right then, they were gearing up for round two. A week later, I got the papers, notice of civil action, Willow Estates Homeowners Association versus Daniel Cooper. They were suing me for environmental sabotage, trespassing on community land, and harassment. They even claimed my moat posed a safety hazard to children. They weren't just trying to fine me anymore. They wanted to ruin me. I called my lawyer, an old friend named Rick, the kind of guy who'd seen enough dirty fights to know when something smelled rotten. He looked through the documents, shook his head, and said, "They don't have a case, but they've got money, and that's worse." He was right. The HOA's strategy wasn't about winning in court. It was about dragging me through the mud, making me bleed money until I broke. They wanted me to sell, to give up. But if they thought I'd fold, they hadn't been paying attention. For months, the legal war went back and forth. Depositions, hearings, endless paperwork. They paraded experts who claimed my moat had altered the local ecosystem. I countered with my own data, maps, and history records. The judge was patient but tired, another bureaucratic cog caught between pride and property lines. Meanwhile, the neighborhood kept suffering. Every rain brought new flooding. Their roads cracked, lawns washed out, and the county started investigating them for unapproved stormwater management. Their insurance rates skyrocketed. And me? My land stayed dry, strong, and green. One afternoon, while the HOA board was holding an emergency meeting in their little clubhouse, I decided to pay them a visit. Not to threaten, just to remind them what real ownership looked like. When I walked in, the room went silent. Linda sat at the end of the table, surrounded by papers and worried faces. "Mr. Cooper," she said, tight-lipped. "This is a private meeting." "Good," I said, "then I'll only waste your time." She glared. "What do you want?" "Simple. End this nonsense. Drop the lawsuit, remove your fake property maps, and stay off my land. Do that, and we can coexist." She leaned back, arms crossed. "We can't make that decision right now." I smiled faintly. "Then nature will decide for you." I turned to leave, but before I reached the door, one of the younger board members, a smug kid in a pastel shirt, snapped, "You think you're some kind of folk hero, don't you?" I stopped. "No," I said quietly. "I'm the guy who just wants to be left alone. That used to be legal in this country." I walked out, leaving their silence behind me. That night, something in me shifted. I was tired of playing defense. Every letter, every fine, every drone over my roof, it was an attack. And I'd spent too long reacting. It was time to go on the offensive. The next morning, I started collecting everything, every photo, every document, every threat they'd sent me. I compiled it all into a thick folder and drove down to the county courthouse. Not to fight in their lawsuit, but to file my own. Cooper vs. Willow Estates Homeowners Association. Grounds: property theft, harassment, defamation, and illegal boundary modification. Rick helped me file it. The look on his face when I handed him the binder said it all. "You really did your homework," he said. I grinned. "I've been preparing for this since the day they put that orange notice on my fence." When word got out, the HOA panicked. Their insurance company started sniffing around. Their members demanded explanations. For the first time, Linda didn't look untouchable. Still, I knew they'd fight dirty. And sure enough, a few nights later, I woke to the sound of engines revving near the creek. I grabbed my flashlight and ran outside. 2 trucks idled by the waterline, headlights off, shovels glinting in the beam. They were trying to sabotage the moat, filling sections, breaking the flow. I shouted, and the men scattered like rats. I managed to grab one, turned out to be one of the HOA's landscapers. He begged me not to call the cops. So I didn't. I just took pictures. Photos of their trucks, their faces, their tools. Evidence. When those pictures hit the county investigator's desk the next day, the HOA's safety complaint crumbled. Suddenly, the tables turned. The media caught wind, local news ran a headline, "Homeowner fights back, small-town HOA faces legal backlash." That's when everything exploded. Reporters showed up at the gates of Willow Estates. Neighbors argued in the streets. Half the residents sided with the board, the other half wanted out. The HOA started to fracture from within. I'd seen plenty of fights in my life, but none like this: lawyers, reporters, neighbors, all circling like vultures. I just kept my head down and worked on my land. Then one afternoon, Linda herself came up my driveway again. No clipboard this time, no sunglasses, just her, tired and older than before. "Mr. Cooper," she said softly, "I need to talk." I didn't answer, just waited. She looked around, taking in the land, the water glimmering behind me. "You've made your point," she said. "The board wants to negotiate. We can settle everything out of court." I studied her face. For once, she wasn't pretending to be in control. She looked defeated. "What changed?" I asked. "Half the residents have quit the HOA," she said. "We're broke. The lawsuit, it's killing us." I nodded slowly. "Maybe next time, you'll think twice before trying to steal from someone." She met my eyes. "You win, Mr. Cooper." But she was wrong. This wasn't about winning. It was about balance, about teaching people like her that land isn't just dirt and paperwork. It's history, sweat, and soul. We signed the agreement 2 weeks later. The HOA withdrew all claims, paid damages, and redrew the property maps to their original boundaries. My moat stayed. My land was legally reaffirmed as private. When it was done, I stood by the creek, watching the sunlight break through the clouds. The water shimmered gold, quiet and calm again. For the first time in years, I felt peace, not the uneasy kind, but real, solid peace. But deep inside, I knew something else too. There will always be another Linda. Another board. Another person who thinks they can own what they don't understand. And when they come, I'll be ready. When the court papers were signed and the ink dried, I thought it was all over. For the first time in years, my land was quiet. The mailbox no longer carried threats, the drone no longer hummed above the trees, and Linda's clipboard finally disappeared from my nightmares. The air felt lighter, the kind of air you only breathe when a fight ends and the world finally exhales with you. But peace, I learned, is fragile. It doesn't arrive with trumpets, it sneaks in softly and leaves the same way. In the weeks after the settlement, I began rebuilding what the war had taken. The porch steps had rotted from months of rain and mud, so I replaced them with cedar planks that smelled sharp and clean. I painted the cabin again, this time deep green to blend with the pines. I cleared out the tools I'd left scattered like relics of a battlefield. Slowly, the place started to look like home again. Every morning I'd sit on the porch, coffee steaming in the cold air, and watch the mist crawl over the moat. The water had settled into a still ribbon, clear enough to see the pebbles below. Deer sometimes came to drink at dawn, their hooves dipping quietly before vanishing into the woods. Life, it seemed, had forgiven us. The locals began stopping by more often, hunters, fishermen, old friends who'd read about me in the paper. Some brought beer, others just wanted to shake my hand. "You showed Coop," they'd say. "You stood up for all of us." I'd smile, but I never quite knew how to answer. It wasn't pride I felt, it was something quieter, heavier. The fight had cost me more than anyone could see. Months of stress, nights without sleep, friendships strained by gossip. You don't go to war with a system and come out clean. Still, the solitude felt good. Too good, maybe. One evening, near sunset, I saw movement across the water. A figure walking along the far edge of Willow Estates. For a moment my heart jumped, old reflexes, but it wasn't Linda. It was a young boy, maybe 12, carrying a fishing rod twice his height. He stopped near the culvert, trying to find a good spot to cast. I crossed the bridge and waved. "Careful there, son. That current gets tricky near the bend." He turned, startled, then grinned. "You're the moat guy." I laughed. "Guess that's me." He told me his name was Ethan. His family had moved into one of the last unsold houses after the HOA collapsed. "My dad says the people before us left in a hurry," he said, eyes wide. "Said the whole place used to flood all the time." "Your dad's not wrong," I said. "But it's safe now." He nodded, then asked shyly, "Can I fish here?" I thought about the years I'd spent defending every inch of this land. How many times I'd said no just to protect what was mine. But the fight was over, and the water was calm. "Sure," I said. "Long as you don't leave hooks in the grass." He grinned and sat up by the bank. For the next hour, we talked about nothing and everything, what kind of bait worked best, how quiet you had to be to catch a catfish. When he caught his first one, a little silver flash barely bigger than his hand, he held it up like a trophy. I snapped a picture with my phone. That night, I realized something. The moat I'd built out of anger had become something else. A border, yes, but also a bridge. People came not to fight but to fish, to watch, to breathe. Nature doesn't hold grudges the way humans do. It just adapts. A month later, I got a letter, not from the county or a lawyer, but from Linda. It was handwritten, the kind of letter that starts with hesitation and ends with humility. "Mr. Cooper, I've moved away from Maplewood. After the HOA dissolved, there wasn't much left to stay for. I wanted to apologize, for everything. You were right. We tried to control what we didn't understand. I hope you found peace. Maybe one day, I'll learn to do the same." Linda Hartman. I read it twice, then folded it carefully and set it in the drawer beside my father's deed. I didn't feel triumph or revenge, just closure. The seasons changed. Fall painted the trees in gold and rust, and the moat mirrored it like a picture frame. When winter came, the surface froze into glass, trapping leaves beneath the ice. I'd walk across it sometimes, boots crunching, breath white in the air. In those quiet months, the land and I healed together. Then spring returned, and with it, new life. Wildflowers pushed through the soil, frogs sang again, and birds nested under the eaves. I built a small dock near the bend where the creek widened, nothing fancy, just a few boards and a stool where I could sit with my rod and my thoughts. One morning, Rick drove out to visit. He leaned on his truck, watching the sunlight dance on the water. "Hard to believe this was a battlefield," he said. "Yeah," I murmured. "Land has a short memory." He chuckled. "You ever think about selling? You could get a fortune for this place now. It's practically a landmark." I shook my head. "You don't sell peace, Rick. You protect it." He nodded, understanding. After he left, I sat by the dock until the sky turned orange. I thought about all the noise, the meetings, the shouting, the lawsuits, and how small it all seemed compared to the rhythm of the creek. The world keeps turning, no matter how loud people argue. Sometimes at night I still heard echoes, voices of the past, angry and proud. But when I stepped outside, all I saw was the moon glinting on still water. The moat that once divided us now protected me from more than trespassers, it protected me from becoming like them. I began keeping a journal, not for revenge or proof, but for memory. I wrote about the first shovel of dirt I turned, the rainstorm that tested the banks, the moment I opened the sluice to save them. I wrote about Linda's face the day she surrendered and the boy who came to fish. Each entry felt like setting a stone in a wall, one that kept bitterness out and gratitude in. One day, Ethan's father stopped by. He handed me a small wooden plaque his son had carved in shop class. It read, "The man who built the moat, thank you for keeping the water honest." I laughed until my eyes stung. Kids have a way of seeing the truth clearer than adults ever do. That night, I hung the plaque above my door. In the distance, where Willow Estates once stood united in its perfect symmetry, houses stood mismatched now, different colors, different gardens, no more uniformity. Freedom had finally found its way in. And somehow, it looked beautiful. Sometimes I'd walk the perimeter, boots sinking in soft soil, tracing the curve of the moat as it shimmered under the afternoon sun. I'd stop at the far edge, where the old boundary markers still stood, half-buried, rusted reminders of a fight long ended. I'd run my hand across one and whisper to myself, never again. Because that's the lesson the land taught me, ownership isn't about control. It's about respect. You don't fence in nature and call it yours, you share it, care for it, and let it shape you back. And if anyone ever tries to take that away again, well, I've still got a shovel. Time has a way of softening the edges of even the sharpest battles. Years have passed since I dug that first trench, since the rumble of heavy equipment echoed through my woods and the neighbors' glares burned across the property line. The world has changed, and so have I. But every time I walk along the moat, I can still hear faint echoes, not of anger anymore, but of lessons learned the hard way. It's funny, people still come by to see the place. Some out of curiosity, others to tell their own HOA horror stories. They park their cars on the gravel shoulder, step out with cameras and questions, like they're visiting a monument. I never charged anyone, never turned them away either. I just smile and say, don't look at the moat. Look at what it stands for. Because this place, this line of water circling freedom, isn't just about winning a fight. It's about reminding yourself that sometimes standing alone is the only way to stay true. The county eventually renamed the road that leads here, Cooper's Bend. They said it was to honor a landmark of local resilience. I didn't ask for it, but when I saw the new sign gleaming in the sun, I couldn't help but smile. Maybe legacy isn't something you plan. Maybe it's something the world gives you when you refuse to bend. By the time the third spring came, nature had completely reclaimed the scars. Grass grew thick along the banks, cattails swayed gently, and fish darted beneath the bridge. Sometimes I'd see turtles sunning themselves on the rocks, their shells glinting like small green shields. Even the trees that once fell during the flooding had sprouted new life. Across the water, the old HOA neighborhood looked different now, freer, messier, more human. Where once every lawn was measured and manicured, now wildflowers grew along driveways, kids rode bikes without helmets, and someone had painted their mailbox bright purple. It wasn't perfect, but it was alive. Linda never came back. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that she'd moved to Oregon, started volunteering with a wetlands restoration project. That made me smile. Maybe, in her own way, she was rebuilding too. Sometimes people need to lose control to finally understand peace. As for me, I kept building, but differently. Not fences or ditches, but spaces for life. I turned a patch of land near the southern edge into a community garden. The locals helped, Ethan and his dad, Rick, and a few families from the old HOA side. We planted corn, tomatoes, and sunflowers that grew taller than the fence posts. No rules, no meetings, just people helping people. It felt right. One evening, as the sun melted into the horizon, I sat by the dock and watched the light dance on the water. The world was quiet except for the frogs and the gentle creak of wood under my boots. My reflection shimmered on the surface, older now, a few more lines on my face, but softer somehow. The kind of lines you earn by making peace with your past. I thought about my father then. About how he'd walked this same land before me, long before the HOA ever existed. He used to say, "Son, the land doesn't belong to us. We belong to it." I never really understood what he meant, not until now. The wind picked up, rippling the water, carrying the scent of pine and rain. It felt like he was still here, somewhere in that breeze, proud but quiet, the way fathers are when they know you finally get it. Sometimes, when I walk along the moat at night, I take a lantern. The light reflects off the surface like a golden ribbon winding through the dark. From above, I imagine it must look like a glowing circle, not a wall, but a halo. A reminder that even pain, when transformed, can protect something beautiful. A few months ago, a reporter from a documentary series came to interview me. She asked, if you could go back, would you still build the moat? I looked across the water, at the stars trembling on its surface. Then I said, yes, but this time, I'd build it slower. Not to keep people out, but to remind them where peace begins. She nodded quietly, and when she left, I realized that the story of this land had outgrown me. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It had become a living symbol, one that whispered to everyone who saw it, stand your ground, but never lose your heart. Summer came again. Ethan's family still lived nearby, and now he was taller, older, with the restless confidence of a teenager. One afternoon he stopped by with a friend, both carrying fishing poles. Mind if we use the dock? He asked. I smiled. You don't need to ask anymore. This place belongs to everyone who respects it. They grinned and ran off toward the water. Their laughter echoed across the moat, bouncing between the trees like the sound of tomorrow. That night, as the crickets sang and the moon rose high, I realized the story had come full circle. What began as a war for ownership had ended in harmony. The land didn't just survive, it healed us all. The next morning, I carved something new into the old wooden sign by the bridge. It once read, private property, no trespassing now. Beneath those faded letters, I etched a new line, respect the land, and it will respect you. I stood back and looked at it, the sunlight warming my hands. For the first time in years, I felt completely at peace. No anger. No fear. Just stillness, the kind you only find when the fight is truly over. The creek murmured beside me, like it was agreeing. The trees swayed gently, and somewhere far off, a hawk cried across the valley. Life kept moving, as it always does. I turned toward my cabin, the porch light glowing softly through the dusk. Behind me, the moat shimmered like liquid gold, circling everything I'd built and everything I'd learned. It wasn't a symbol of division anymore. It was a mirror, showing that even the deepest scars can become reflections of growth. And as I walked home, I whispered to the quiet land, let the water remember, so I don't have to.